I've been learning a lot from 1 Samuel as we've been back in the Word, honestly, which is important. Pastor hopefully doesn't get up and dispense wisdom from on high as if he's not learning from the text he's studying. Studying it every week, using some great commentaries that elders helped me put together. It's been a learning process for me to just reevaluate some of the Old Testament stories, reevaluate the way it applies. Even teaching church history this morning and going through 300 years in about 100 years every 10 minutes. Just looking at the legacy of God's people, it's helpful in so many ways to help me learn from people in the past and also the disposition of people in relation to God throughout generations. And so, I don't know about you guys, but I mean, re-looking at David and Goliath and understanding that, it's not just about me overcoming things, but it's really about, we see the first portrait of this man who's after God's own heart. And I think now in terms, when I think about, I know I'm stretching the context, so don't take this as biblical truth, but when I think of a man after God's own heart, I know what that means primarily. I also think in my head that word after has a pursuit to it. He's after God's heart. He knows he's not there like myself, but I'm pursuing that heart. I would love to reflect that heart of Christ. And we see that manifest in the David-Goliath story as a passion for God to not be dishonored and mocked, and also a concern and a passion to see his people not mocked. I said, learning that, David's story isn't about David overcoming. It's about how he's thinking of God and how he's thinking about loving others. And that continues into today's message. For those who are just joining us this morning, we've been moving through, we took the first 15 chapters of 1 Samuel, and then we took a break, went through some other books, another book of the Bible. Now we're back in the Old Testament, continuing on. And so we've seen that as it begins to chronicle the story of God's people, we see Abraham is promised he'll be a big people. He's become a nation of God's people as God promised. And then those people, like a king, God says, be careful what you wish for, gives them Saul. Saul has proven himself just about in every way unworthy, and now he is being rejected, whereas we see being raised up then is David. I want to keep coming back to that quote too by David Sumura, which says, God, the Lord of history, providentially guides the lives of two persons, Saul and David. The former's decline and the latter's rise. Saul is caught up in something larger than himself, something from which he cannot extricate himself, and all of his devices go wrong. David is also caught up in events he cannot control, destined to be a success. And we understand ultimately God is moving pieces, although we see even the way that his church grows or somebody invites a friend. There are a lot of human means that we see, but ultimately undergirding all that is God's providence. So that even when David has a heart, when God's beloved opposes those who mock and antagonize God's people, when he seeks to bring honor to the Father, when he seeks to bring honor to God's people, it is, as he says, by God's hand I was delivered from the paw of a bear, the paw of the lion, and ultimately then from the gigantic spirit of David. And so today we move into chapter 18. We continue on. We're going to burn through chapter 18. I didn't ask anybody else to read this section. Particularly, there's some sections I love to have people read, and I love to get other voices up here. There's a little content in this one that felt like I didn't want anyone else to have to turn red reading it. So I'm just going to go through it with you as we dive in. We technically are starting with verse 10, but let's roll back for context to verse 6 and roll from there. Because we're going to see Saul's jealousy of David. As I explained, he is in the decline, David is on the rise. God is moving and at work. And we see Saul's response to ultimately what God is doing. Now Goliath has just been beaten. The Philistines have suffered a great stomping at the hands of the Israelites then. We see then last week David and Jonathan's friendship and what godly friendship is sourced around, based around, fueled by. I really enjoyed both studying and being able to articulate about that. And now, as we saw, we sort of finished off, by contrast, Saul's disposition. Jonathan sees David and David's heart for God and his people, and he's like, I want to be best friends forever and actually kneel to somebody with that type of faith. Saul, on the other hand, says, as they were coming home, verse 6, when David returned from striking down the Philistine, the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated. Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul is very angry. And this saying displeased him. He said, they described to David 10,000s, and to me they described thousands, and what more can he have but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day on. It's that side eye you kind of give somebody, right? The next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul hurled his spear, for he thought, I'll pin David to the wall. But David evaded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence and made him a commander of 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. And David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in fearful awe of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them. Then Saul said to David, here is my elder daughter, Merab. I will give her to you for a wife. Only be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles. For Saul thought, let not my hand be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him. And David said to Saul, who am I? And who are my relatives, my father's clan in Israel, that I should be son-in-law to a king? But at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, she was given to Adriel the Mahathlite for a wife. Now, Saul's daughter, Michal, loved David. And they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. Saul thought, let me give her to him, that she may be a snare for him, and the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Therefore Saul said to David a second time, you shall now be my son-in-law. And Saul commanded his servants, speak to David in private, and say, behold, the king has delight in you, and all his servants love you. Now become the king's son-in-law. And Saul's servants spoke those words in the ears of David. And David said, does it seem to you a little thing to become the king's son-in-law, since I'm a poor man and have no reputation? And the servants of Saul told him, thus and so did David speak. Then Saul said, thus you shall say to David, the king desires no bride price except 100 foreskins of the Philistines, that he may be avenged of the king's enemies. Now, Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. And when the servants told David these words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law. Before the time had expired, David arose and went, along with his men, and killed 200 of the Philistines. And David brought their foreskins, which were given in number, full number, to the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him his daughter Michal for a wife. But when Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him, Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy continually. Then the princes of the Philistines came out to battle, and as often as they came out, David had more success than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was highly esteemed. God's people said, Amen. You might see why I didn't assign that reading. Everybody likes to talk about foreskins. So, in a rage, Saul twice tries to kill David. I don't know about your relationships. I don't have a lot of friends. My boss has never, I've never had an employer who literally threw things at me to kill me. When he fails to kill him directly, and maybe he could have blamed that on the rage or this tormenting spirit, he might have been able to write that off. So then he comes up with an active plot. This is where, as I said, from 1 Samuel, we get a lot of the conspiracy, Shakespearean stories that we have seen a lot of fiction come out of these old historical documents. They've inspired a lot of similar political intrigue and the machinations, sort of a house of cards, biblical times kind of thing. He plots against him. Well, I'm going to put him on the battlefront and he'll get killed. Well, that doesn't happen. So, you know what? I'm going to distract him with a carrot. Look at this beautiful woman. Now go fight. And I'm going to give him an impossible task. A task that, you think about it, this would be considered desecration. He didn't just kill Philistines and leave them on the battlefield. He then mutilated them, took parts of them away. The Philistines would have him on their #1 hit list, right? If there's anything we want, it's we want to see this guy who's perpetrated this die in battle. So Saul knows, I'm going to set up these pieces so that he falls. This person I'm fearing is God's anointed, will fall by what doesn't appear to be my direct hand. But no matter what Saul does, he's absolutely thwarted by God's plan. David has success. David is loved. Saul's son Jonathan loves him, and as we talked about last week, gave him his armor, gave him in all things that we would understand culturally would basically mean, I'm giving you my rights of ascension. So Saul's own eldest son has basically bent his service to David. And now his daughter loves him. Everybody loves David. Saul is frustrated. Saul is foiled. Now, I'm going to give most of us the benefit of the doubt this morning. And maybe I shouldn't. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands of who's got sort of a Macbethian-style plot going at their work right now to get rid of their rival. I'm going to give most of us the benefit of the doubt. That maybe you're not actively plotting someone's downfall. Intentionally, directly. It might be hard for some of us to identify. So, these are like the TV shows I watch. Somebody's saying they watch the government intrigue, House of Cards, West Wing, all that stuff. People are always jockeying and maneuvering for power. Trying to get a coworker killed or out of position, defamed, spreading gossip to slur their reputation. Now, some of you might, if you're honest, be able to admit to some of that. Ever been in a workplace, somebody's looking better than us? If I'm wrong and some of you are actively plotting the death of a rival, please repent. Let's put that out there first and foremost. But I'm going to assume most of us aren't there. But what I don't want us to do is let ourselves off and say, well, that Saul's a jerk. He's way over there. I don't want us to let ourselves off quite so scot-free. Let's ask a few questions. What is your normative reaction, if we're honest? Whether it's work, maybe it's the kids, maybe it's relatives, maybe it's friends. What's your normative reaction when someone is being praised? It probably works on a spectrum like this. Good for them. How inspiring. Or, I don't care. Right? Or some of you, that it almost it puts a little burr in your cell. Oh boy, I better work harder. They're getting noticed. I want to get noticed too. Some of you, I got to show them up. Can't have them looking better in the eyes of whomever. Or, maybe at least even in the heart, there's just that bit of you that says, I've got to where I'd like to get rid of them. Less of them and more of me. What about me? Because here's what's happening, and I want us to understand that so that we don't judge Saul so harshly that we're not actually taking this for some self-application. Saul's jealousy, Saul's envy, as commentators keep coming back to again and again in this, it is envy and it is jealousy, and it leads to conspiracy. Now some of you might be able to then write off, well, my sin isn't working its way out in some kind of Saul-style conspiracy, but ultimately it still falls under the same category of idolatry. It's idolatry. What do I mean by idolatry? We know Saul professes and proclaims to know the one true God. God is at work, obviously. Goliath has been toppled. Philistines are thwarted. God has a plan, and God is putting that plan into order. It just doesn't have Saul at the apex anymore. Saul's star is not rising. And so what is Saul doing then with his life? What is Saul doing in response to that with his time? What is Saul doing in response to that with his position and his power and his wealth? What Saul is doing is effectively saying, my kingdom come, my will be done. On earth, and who cares about heaven? None of us like to think that's our normative operation, but we need to ask ourselves sometimes, is this my disposition? And even if the outworking isn't quite the same, how far am I from Saul? Question, what does Saul have to lose? Right? He has some fame, right? This begins with the women singing. He stands to lose his fame. And you know what? If he loses his kingship, if something happens, if he is dethroned, he loses his fame. He also loses his status and the privileges that come with that. And you know what? The king has a lot of acquisition and possession. All of that might be taken away as well. So he's worried about his standing. He's worried about his status. He's worried about his stuff. Are we so apart from this? Commentators keep circling that familiar word. Proverbs 14 says, a tranquil heart gives life to the flesh, but envy makes the bones rot. So right now, David has favor. David has success. David is accruing, and Saul is seeing that and thinking, I'm decreasing, or maybe I'm just maintaining, but that's not good enough. Envy makes his bones rot. Ecclesiastes says, I saw that all toil and all skill in work comes from a man's envy of his neighbor. This is also vanity and a striving after wind. It's like Wile E. Coyote chasing the roadrunner. It never happens. It never arrives. It never reaches. And this is a place where I think we do, at least subtly or maybe strongly, connect with Saul. The poor neighbor suddenly has something he wants. And instead of rejoicing, jealousy and envy. Jealousy and envy. The poor shepherd boy is being sung about. Can I relate to this? Oh, of course I can. I'd like to say I can't, but of course I can. And all you have to do is go on your social, basically we have the biblical equivalent of Facebook, right? Saul has 1,000 likes, but he's upset that David has 10,000 likes. Like do we relate to this? Maybe at school, maybe at work, maybe some of us literally on Facebook. I need more likes than I do. James has 100 friends. I only have 50 friends. I need more friends, which means people that click you on Facebook, right? This could be work. This could honestly be sometimes parents turning against one another in relation to the praise of their kids. This could just be friends amidst friends. Who's sort of the alpha amongst your friends? This could be church size, right? Oh, that other church has more views of their sermons on YouTube. This could have so many applications. But Saul, at the end of the day, is not just worried about losing his network. This, with David taking over, David surpassing or supplanting, is not just a question of his network, it's also his net worth. And so there's that question for us, particularly on a great day when we can come and celebrate humbly the communion together. Which do we find ourselves jealous about or most zealous about? Right, for some of us, it's our position. We love where we're at work. We love where we are standing. We love the privileges that come with that and the perks and the recognition, and I can put it on a business card, and I have a position that's been given to me. For some of us, it's our popularity, right? We just want to be liked, loved. We want everybody to speak well of us. We want everybody to think we're the best of the best. Maybe that doesn't translate to an official position. But like Saul, we love that. We want people singing that we have done great things. Maybe for some of us, it's just our appearance. Maybe for some of us, it's, I want the best. I want to be adorned with the best, wear the latest, look the greatest. Now for some of us, it's not just what adorns us. It's all the stuff that we have around us. It is related to actually most of the world throughout all of human history, all of you who actually have some kind of American home and roof over your heads, kingly possessions, honestly, compared to the rest of the world throughout all generations of mankind. Percentage of people in America who experience what sometimes throughout history kings have not enjoyed in the relative palace that we have called our Rambler. Titus 3 says, "For we were once foolish, disobedient, led astray, slaves to various passions and pleasures, passing our days in malice and envy, hated by others and hating one another." Now that sounds extreme. You're like, "Whoa, okay, I don't do that. I don't do that at all." But are we slaves to various passions and pleasures? There's a very, very coarse film I watched in the 90s called Fight Club. The character Tyler Durden said, "The things you own end up owning you." Right? Are we like Saul, a slave to our desired fame and position? Are we a slave to our bank account? Are we a slave to our holdings? Are we a slave to the stuff that we crave that is earthly and material and or fleeting? I don't need to go from people singing about 1,000 wins to 10,000. I don't necessarily need, I haven't actually recently killed 1,000 people, so I don't necessarily want the same accolades that Saul wants versus David. So I don't need to go from singing about 1,000 wins to, I want people to be congratulating me for 10,000 wins. I could just be dissatisfied with my terabyte hard drive and really need a petabyte hard drive. That's 1,000 terabytes, by the way. Right? My neighbor has one. I'm deficient. That's what happens. Right? Saul is sung at the 1,000 level. David is sung at the 10,000 level. Saul is jealous and angry. Everyone, and we find ways to justify, right? Everybody who's anybody is already upgraded. I'm falling behind in life. I don't have the latest software. I don't have the latest download. When I was growing up, there's a whole idolatrous aim in our media culture. Anybody remember that show, Lifestyle of the Rich and Famous? Anyway, there's all sorts of different iterations, cribs and whatever that have come since. Then and now, it's competitive. Right? My clothes are up. My clothes aren't worn out. My clothes don't have holes in them, but they're a little 90s. I need upgrade. I need new ones. They're not good enough, even though they're wholly sufficient for every practical means. They're not the current style. Something is wrong with me. In fact, somebody wants their 90s wardrobe back, right? They're not threadbare. There's no practical reason. But I look at what that guy's wearing. Actually, it's got a cool tank top. And I think, look at what ladies think, look at what she's wearing. I'm deficient. I need that. I need more. I'm jealous. In fact, I'm angry at God because he hasn't given me or he's giving to them. This is what happens if our identity is in our status, our standing, or our stuff. Right? This is the problem. Right? What kind of dining set defines me as a person? Some of you have had that conversation. You just don't want to admit it. I've had that conversation. All right? I'm just going to be open and honest. I didn't use those words, but it seemingly held a lot of gravitas. Right? And God has not called Saul. Has God called Saul to chase his fame to equal or surpass David? No, absolutely not. God hasn't called him to weaponize his daughters. Right? That's horrible. And what is Saul neglecting while he's on about this power play? What is he not doing? Shouldn't that be time devoted to God's purposes and God's kingdom that he is expending on this vast other endeavor to reaffirm or maintain Saul? That's some great questions. Are we content with what we have? Is there a contentment in our hearts, although we might receive a gift or God might bless us in a way and we feel as though I have freedom to go, I can buy something new. This isn't saying somehow that all of you must cease purchasing anything. Some of you in the room, who knows, maybe that's applicable. But are you content with what you have? See, it's very easy for some of us to say, okay, I don't literally covet my neighbor. I look across, I don't want his house or his lawn or his wife or his dog or the corgi's pretty cute, but right? We don't literally covet the neighbor and we think we can write that off. But we don't need literal Joneses anymore to sin. All we need is Sears catalog, right? I just dated myself. I actually did that on purpose. When I was a little kid, that's what it looked like. I would get the Sears catalog, and there'd be the toy section, and there'd be the section my mom would rip out because I wasn't supposed to look at it. And then there's, right there, I would look through this Sears catalog. Now we just have an entire internet with 1,000 links. We don't need it. Or I can just go to the mall and window shop. But that's what gets into our heads, right? When I was a little kid, something that was in that Sears catalog was the Death Star playset. Death Star playset. And that was long, long ago. It's not like Star Wars is relevant anymore. But you know what? I had Star Wars action figures when that movie came out. And I was happy to have those Star Wars action figures. And then that catalog let me know that I was deficient. And I was incomplete. By the way, to this day, I've still never owned the Death Star playset. And that is not a challenge to anyone, because my point is, I should not be thinking of myself as deficient without it. So please don't go buy it on eBay for me. See that? I'm fighting the part of me that actually says once they, yeah. But that's because we actually have a false understanding. I want you to think about, we even do studies that try to justify things like standard of living. There's a couple different terms that can be used as we talk about life and culture and where we're at with everybody. Standard of living generally refers to the level of wealth, comfort, material goods, and necessities available to a certain socioeconomic class in a certain geographic area. Now you notice one of those words is necessities. And yet most of us take wealth, comfort, material goods, and decide that's all part of the same parcel, right? We take all four of those and call them necessities. This is all we need, guys. This is all we need, ladies and gentlemen, to, like the Levite and the priest, walk by the stranger on the side of the road and withhold our provisions. Right? This is all I need to justify my upward mobility or maintenance at the expense of being good Samaritans, as Jesus would illuminate that we're called to be, providing for the stranger, loving one another. This stands not in opposition, but in contrast. It's interesting to look at the idea of quality of life is the general well-being of individuals and societies. Now, are Christians all about this? Absolutely. As people who care about the impoverished, who care about those in need, who care about one another, the idea to look at quality of life, which deals with things like equal protection under law, freedom from discrimination, presumption of innocence unless proven guilty, the right to marry or have a family, freedom of thought, freedom of religion, free choice of employment, equal pay for equal work. These are the things that seem worth striving toward because they don't just have individual application, but they're very much about others. My favorite thing, one of the most scariest moments, I don't know if you guys probably do remember, there's one scene in Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. There's one moment. You get the first ghost, shows him his past. You get the second ghost who shows Scrooge the present. Then you have the third ghost, and he's kind of scary, right? But the scary part actually begins before the third ghost. There is a scene, and I wanted to share it with you. Read it. Charles Dickens' classic. Scrooge looks down at the ghost of Christmas present and says, "Forgive me if I'm not justified in what I ask," said Scrooge, looking intently at the spirit's robe, "but I see something strange and not belonging to yourself protruding from your skirts. Is it a foot or a claw?" "It might be a claw, for there is flesh, for all the flesh there is upon it," said the spirit's sorrowful reply. "Look here." From the foldings of his robe it brought out two children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. They knelt down at his feet and clung upon the outside of its garment. "Oh man, look here, down here," exclaimed the ghost. They were a boy and girl, yellow, meager, ragged, scowling, wolfish, but prostrate too in their humility, where graceful youth should have filled their features out and touched them in its freshest tints. A stale and shriveled hand like that of age had pinched and twisted them and pulled them into shreds. Where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked and glared out menacingly. No change, no degradation, no perversion of humanity in any grade through all the mysteries of wonderful creation has monsters half so horrible and dread. Scrooge started back, appalled. Having them shown to him in this way, he tried to say they were fine children, but the words choked themselves, rather than be parties to a lie of such enormous magnitude. Spirit, are they yours? Scrooge could say no more. They are man, said the Spirit, looking down upon them, and they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. This boy is ignorance, the girl is want. Beware them both, and of all their degree, but most of all, beware this boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom. Saul wants what Saul wants, irrespective of God's plan or kingdom. And Saul's ignorance does nothing but further hurt his kingdom, his family, and ultimately Saul. Saul's standing, his possessions, and his legacy are more important to him than God's glory. That's what's happening. He is discontent, and God opposes him. Contrast that with David. Contrast that, ladies and gentlemen, with David as we consider where our hearts should be. David desires the advance of God's kingdom and the honor of his people. David's humility honors God's kingdom, his family, and ultimately himself. David's standing, possessions, and legacy are subservient to God's glory, and he is content, and God blesses him. That's something deep we should desperately consider. See the difference between having an identity of entitlement, where we say things like, I deserve everything that I have, versus an identity of humility that says, I'm not worthy of what I've been given. When David is offered king's daughters, he's like, who am I? Who am I that I should be a king's son-in-law? I don't deserve being brought into that family. Which one, if we're honest, best describes our daily disposition toward most things? I would say at this point in my life, it feels like a real 50-50 struggle every day. I'm not here to tell you as a pastor, I have ascended, thou shalt meet me there. This is a huge struggle. I wake up in the morning pretty much thinking I deserve everything that I have, and it takes a goodly portion of the day to even start cycling back into that mindset that David can express. One of them, Saul, lives in fear. Who can reflect or resonate with this? One of them lives in fear. They wake up daily now in this space, in this chapter, and thinks, I may lose what I have. Versus David, living in faith, saying, I will receive what God gives. Which one, if we're honest, describes our operative foundation? I can't pretend that I live mostly in the other. By God's grace and by his charity and by the equipping and enabling of his Spirit, I find myself in the treasured category at beautiful moments in my day. But it's a wrestle. Hebrews 13 says, keep your life free from love of money. Be content with what you have, for he said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So we can confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do? I want you to also understand, if money isn't your thing, you can import any other of Saul's components, the major one of which really is his standing in fame, right? Keep your life free from the love of fame, power, status, standing. Be content with what you have. Ecclesiastes 5 says, everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions, catch this piece, everyone to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil. This is the gift of God. See, some of us should be asking for this gift instead of scrabbling like Saul. Some of us desperately need to start putting into our prayers the idea of, God, give me the power to actually enjoy what I have so I don't wake up with that desperate craving for more or better or equal or surpassing others. Just make me content. Then if I get something new, if something new is given to me or comes into my life, or I have opportunity to go out and take something that's fresh and shiny, it feels like a gift, not a gratified expectation. To accept his lot But instead, we don't have power to enjoy things. We often have paranoia to hold on to them, right? We have anxiety instead of accepting our lot. We wring our hands instead of rejoicing. They should be up. Notice, too, the gift of God is not just a job that's worth rejoicing over by our estimation. It's the ability to rejoice in that job when it's toil. That's the gift of God, perhaps, we should start praying for. It's about contentment. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money or fame or wealth or power, or he who loves wealth with his income. This is also vanity. So we can insert any of the others in there. Just think about it. Instead of will not be satisfied with money, it's vanity. What advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes? When goods increase, they increase who eat them. See, let's substitute a couple things in there without denigrating Scripture. He who loves fame will not be satisfied with fame, nor he who loves acclaim with his applause. This is also vanity. How about position? He who loves position will not be satisfied with his position, nor he who loves status with his power. This is also vanity. You know what? You increase in that, you just get increased in those who challenge it. David has the spotlight in this story, and Saul says, I'm losing my status, I'm losing my standing, I'm losing my son's favor, I'm losing my daughter's favor, I'm losing my daughter's love, I'm not God's favorite anymore. I'm not the center of his plan or his story. You know, it's taken me 40 plus years. I've made that a refrain, not because I've got it, because I need to daily remember. I'm not the center of God's story. We will partake of that center today. But godliness with contentment is great gain. We brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we shall be content. Those who desire to be rich, famous, powerful, liked by all, fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money, perhaps power, or perhaps position, is a root of all kinds of evils. It's through this craving some have wandered away from the faith, pierced themselves with many pangs. I want us to make sure we understand today, instead of thinking, yay David, boo Saul, I want us to put ourselves in the crucible between the two men. His conspiracy is a compounding of Saul's sin. His primary problem is discontent. His primary problem is God has already spoken what the future will be, and Saul is discontent with accepting it. See, we don't need conspiracy to be our outworking sin. We don't need to throw spears at people to fall into Saul's snare. All we need to do is hear somebody's done better than us and have that burning envy in our gut. Right? Saul could rejoice in God's decision even if it means his light is being eclipsed. Saul could choose to become penitent at this point, but all he has is bitterness. We don't need conspiracy to fall into Saul's snare. You know, the only thing we need to do is, here's what it is. Nothing. Nothing. The story of the Good Samaritan. We don't see somebody beaten and laying on the side of the road. We don't see the priest and the Levite come by and take spears and throw them into him as they walk by. Their spears are abdication. Their spears are turning away. They don't throw spears. Somebody else took care of the beating. These two other men in the story of the Good Samaritan, before the Samaritan comes and scoops up that man and sacrifices and serves and spends his money and his time and his talents on making him better and showing him the love of Jesus Christ. The other two men just decided they were too busy. And you know what that's saying? Just like Saul, my kingdom come, my will be done. Establishing my kingdom, establishing James's kingdom, establishing, put yourself or your household in there, establishing that is more important than supporting God's kingdom. He is doing something that does have dangerous application to our lives and our faith. Because by contrast, we see David is pleased to fight the Lord's battles, even though it means putting himself in danger. He actually keeps turning down the honors that accompany it until he's told, all right, well, go champion a quest. And he's like, all right, I will do that. I will go out and I will do that to prove. In fact, I'll double down. I'll give you double what you asked for. Before that, we see him actually humbly turning down honors. It's not about advancing his station. That's some application that we can meditate on today and take into our week and take into our summer together as some of us replot life and circumstance, right? Jealousy for a cultural ideal can make us withhold Christ's charity. If there's an ideal of what I should be or ought to be, whether it's the literal Jones across the street or the Jones who's running through that series of tubes that lead to our computer, cultural ideal can make us withhold Christ's charity. Envy for an entitled standard can make me cease to extend Christ's hand of service. And zealousness for my time can very easily every day make me say, I'll sacrifice for you some other time. Tomorrow maybe. It's always a day away. Establishing my kingdom is more important than establishing the kingdom of God. A kingdom, by the way, in which we simultaneously profess that the most precious thing of all was given for us. Instead of serving that ultimate sacrificial servant master, see, Saul is trying to find a way, actually. We see him then trying to manipulate David. Right? Well, he's either going to be dead or he's going to be my son-in-law, and thus I'm going to manipulate him so he's on my side, under my rule, or somehow what David does is going to fulfill my direction. That's another question for us too. Does God exist as a cause? Do we treat God as if he was the same? As Saul worked and tried to manipulate God's beloved, do we try to find a way to get God's anointed on our side or under James's rule or as a cog for our machinations? We can rationalize a lot of our motivations for doing a lot of things. Our ascents to power, position, status, wealth. But at the end of the day, this is why Saul was rejected. Rationalizing God's heart to fit and fulfill his desires. Ultimately forsaking that heart. When push comes to shove, forsaking God. Maybe it's time our standard of living mirrored God's standard. We see in 2 Corinthians 12. It says, for the sake of Christ then, I'm content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I'm weak, then I'm strong. Man, that's a hard one for me. But I'm willing to struggle and pray into it and pray for that heart. And I'm willing to do that with you. Are we content with that? If most of us are honest, we're not content if we know somebody else has a more recent iPhone. We're not content if somebody got more birthday wishes than we did on Facebook. We're not content if someone else got a promotion instead of us. And that is so far away from what I'm seeing right there, where it says, I'm content with hardships, persecutions, and calamities. How far I find myself normatively away from the heart of Christ. I'll close with this. In 2014, Sudanese woman named Miriam. She married a Christian man named Daniel Wani. And because in her lineage there was Muslim heritage, she was sentenced to death for her faith. And she was sentenced to death for her faith, but because she'd married a Christian man, they don't count that. So actually she was then charged with adultery as well for marrying a non-Muslim. And so she was given 100 lashes. She was given the sentence of 100 lashes before death for the adultery and then the blasphemy, the apostasy. She was at this point 8 months pregnant. Her husband was wheelchair-bound and depended on her. She faced death for apostasy and adultery, 100 lashes, and then hanging. She gave birth to a daughter in prison while waiting. Her defense attorney got death threats to pull out, not represent her. And what did she say when she was asked to recant to save her life, to escape hardship and persecution and calamity? She said, I am a Christian, and I will remain a Christian. A month later, she was released, was able to escape and able to leave the country. She was, in this case, spared. And I read a story today where David is getting spears thrown at him by the king in person who is supposed to be acting like God's anointed servant. And he continues to be God's servant. Saul is treated to a relationship where David serves him. David brings comfort to Saul's spirit by playing the lyre. He defeats enemies and wins battles for Saul. He becomes as a humble son then, marrying into the family, and Saul tries to pierce him and kill him. No matter what Saul does, though, guess what? God gives David victory. Now, lest we exalt David too much, some of you already know the story. Years down the road, guess who is going to be jealous of someone and put them in the line of fire to die in battle? David, with a man named Uriah, because he wants his wife. So David is not the perfect son that we're all looking for, right? It's okay. He's not supposed to be the perfect. He's a foreshadowing of something greater. Because we are treated to a relationship wherein Jesus has served us. He offers comfort to our spirit, according to the Scriptures. He defeats our enemies, Satan, conquers sin and death for us by his death and resurrection on the cross. And he invites us into relationship. He says, let's be family. And today we celebrate communion today because corporately, though us not directly, 2,000 years later, because of our sin, which he died for at that pivotal moment in human history where God became flesh, we corporately, with those who actively did it, pierced him. The spear actually landed its blow. The bad news? We've one-upped Saul. He threw spears and missed. Our sin has hit its target. The side of Christ, the hands of Christ, the feet of Christ, from which blood and water flowed. The good news, no matter what we've done, God gives Jesus Christ victory. Amen? The question is, will we receive his grace, and how will we live in light of that grace? Versus how much do we jockey for our own glory at the expense of extending God's mercy to others, unto others? He's extended mercy to us. That's why we come to the table today. Will we be imitators of God as beloved little children and extend his mercy to others? How much time are we wasting conspiring to build ourselves up because ultimately we think we deserve it more than our siblings in Christ or the stranger? We can struggle and stretch ourselves in light of our Savior's grace and heart as his instrument, like David. Or I can be, a soul-seeking opportunist like Saul. The cool thing is, we're not trapped in the historical example of Saul or his fate. That's not where we stand today. We can give our lives to Jesus. We can become a disciple of Christ. Our life can receive grace, and our hearts can be changed by his Spirit. Or if we already have done that, but maybe we find ourselves in a season where we're faltering, holding back, we can steer clear of a prodigal season and recommit ourselves to him. God's people said,